Voss begins by saying on the bottom of 243 there that the same relation applies to Jehovah and time. Now, if you stop there and just reflect for a second, he said everything that we need to know. That just as God remains who he is without change in relation to space, so God remains who he is in relation to time. And here's the key: as both space and time are created. Space is not uncreated, time is not uncreated, only God is uncreated. And so he says, and I think this is a wonderful way of putting it. This brings into view, people may want to listen to, our listeners may want to check our last discussion. I'll try to make a reference to it and bring this in. He says, while eternity can be expressed only in terms of time, given anthropomorphism, top of page 244, all the while, in reality, it lies altogether above time. Now, here's one way to cut through lack of clarity on this discussion. Voss is so helpful. Bavinck and Van Til are so helpful. In fact, I'm going to read something that you found, a letter to Carl F. Henry from Cornelius. Here's the key: eternity is not a created thing or an abstract conceptuality. Eternity is an attribute of God himself. And so while we express God's eternity in the anthropomorphic language of non-succession of time, for instance.
Apophaticisms. Can I use that word?
Apophaticisms, absolutely. All the while, in reality, eternity lies altogether above time. Why? Because God is eternal and the creature is temporal. Do you mind, Camden, would you read a quote here before us from Van Til
Oh,
to
yeah.
Carl F.
I
Henry
like that
you
one.
dug up? Would you read that? Because it gets, this is Voss's point. And remember Van Til's relation to Voss. Voss was his professor, favorite professor. Van Til's learning these things from Voss. But listen to what Van Til says, reflecting what Voss is saying here. And he gives us a very concrete conception of eternity being coincident with God himself, and not a
Sure.
thing outside of God or some tertium quid, some intermediate category between God and man.
Yeah, and that's the big issue. Yeah, we have been and continue to, although the work has slowed down, continue to work on Van Til's letters, his archive, and seeking to transcribe them, hopefully someday to get them published and make a searchable database, etc. So in that work, we uncovered this letter he wrote to Carl Henry, a very significant figure, neo-evangelical. And Van Til wrote this, starting with the creator-creature distinction as basic to one's thought. One need not, and in fact cannot, after that, discuss such concepts as time and eternity by themselves. As then it is fatal, so there's a little ellipse, we're taking some excerpts, as then it is fatal to fail to introduce the creator-creature distinction at the outset of one's thought, so it is also fatal to fail to think of eternity as exclusively a characteristic of God, and of time as exclusively a characteristic of the created world. It would be to make God subject to the conditions of his creatures, subject to change, etc. Doesn't
I
get any
know
clearer than
there are
that.
some quotes, Camden, that you almost don't want to comment on because it's so eloquent and so helpful. But please, I'll just note this. Van Til is saying it is fatal to fail to think of eternity as exclusively a characteristic of God. What that means is that just as transcends all space but is everywhere present in space, so God transcends all time, yet is present everywhere in it. Why? Because eternity is a characteristic of God alone, and time is a characteristic of the created world alone. And if you'll just think back to what Bavinck and Van Til said elsewhere in our previous episode, there is no intermediate category between God and the creature. And so when God relates to time, He relates to time in exactly the same way he relates to space. He relates as the creator to the creature, and as such, just as he remains immense with respect to space, so he remains timeless, eternal in relation to time.